Hello and welcome to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Each week we bring to you a new program on education, innovation, technology, and humanitarian services. I'm the president-elect of this club, and this week I'm very excited to bring to you our guest speaker for the week. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce our very own members first. Right below me first, we have Mitty Chang, who is our current president, our leader. And right above next to me, we have Rushton, who will be introducing our guest for today. And also Rushton is our past president.
I am indeed. Thank you, Stephen, who is our president-elect for the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. We love connecting with wildly interesting people wherever they are in the world, so that their stories about how they see new ways of looking at business, at new ways of looking at service, can be the kinds of things that inspire others. And this week we have speaking to us, we have Dr. Kristen Swanson. Now, Kristen is somebody that I am fortunate to know personally, because we both inhabit that ed tech world kind of space. And so I've had the pleasure of talking with her on multiple occasions. There are lots of cool things that I'm sure you've already read about Kristen in the bio above. But two things that I'll highlight. One is that she is the author of two books. Her first book, which was published in 2013, is Professional Learning in the Digital Age. And the second book, published a year later, was Unleashing Student Superpowers, which is a very cool title. Now, Kristen, or Dr. Swanson, is somebody who brings a lot of personal energy to what she does. So I think all of us know those folks who find a really good idea and pursue it with incredible tenacity. And she is one of those people. And you're going to get to hear today about the Edcamp movement, which she is one of the founders of. And I am really excited to pass this over to someone I am proud to know, and that is Dr. Kristen Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It is such a delight and honor to be here tonight. And I only hope that I can live up to that introduction. So I'm going to be sharing with you one of the things that I am most passionate about in my life, and that is connecting and empowering other people. And that probably makes sense because I have spent my life dedicated to education and teaching and helping others. And I'm just really glad and hopeful to connect with all of you out there tonight and to have the opportunity to share a little bit about my passion. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, is that showing up? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to share just a little bit about one of the biggest joys, but also one of the biggest surprises in my life, and that is really the story of this Edcamp movement. And you might be thinking to yourself, you know, I'm not an educator, or you might be thinking to yourself, oh, this won't be applicable to me in the area of business or my segment of the market. And what I would encourage you is, I would encourage you to keep listening, because I think that everything we're going to talk about today is not necessarily specifically about teachers or people in schools. It's about humans who are eager to learn and get better at what they do. And I think there are nuggets in here about the wonderful people who sort of made all of this happen, who were not me, for context, who I just sort of watched with awe, that will be sort of beneficial or interesting to many of you out there. So I want you to think back before we dive in on your best learning experience this year. And it may have happened at work. Perhaps it happened you know, in a personal hobby. Perhaps it happened with a family member. And I'll just share with you, you know, some of the things that happened for me that were some of my best learning experiences. And all of them, you know, upon reflection, actually happen with other people, because learning is actually really, really social, especially for adults. So my best learning experiences were actually connecting with some teachers in the South Bronx about how they were approaching their onboarding, and I actually took it back to my company and used a lot of those same strategies. My husband and I actually had the opportunity to learn how to go ziplining, and that was one of the most incredible learning experiences that I had this year. And I also finally mastered how to grow a rose in my rose garden without killing it, which was an activity that was not done in isolation, but with my neighbor, who really supported me throughout the entire journey. And I really think that when I think about these personal learning experiences that I've had and the social nature of them, it all comes back to me, and it sort of hits me right in sort of what I care about most. And it's not necessarily that these social learning experiences are different from how our learning experiences should happen in our companies and in our schools. And really, you know, the essential aspect of learning and growing is becoming more and more self-directed, finding these learning partners, seeking them out, seeking out these experiences, and truly being in control of the empowerment and truly being in control of the mastery that you feel when you learn something. And so this is often what training looks like. This is often what sometimes professional development may look like. And these habits that we have, even though we know that adults are social learners, and even though we know that things go better when adults are empowered to make many choices on their own, sometimes these old habits creep back in. And sometimes we end up in learning situations, either in the professional environment or the corporate environment or the classroom, that look very, very similar to this. And these are obviously very different images than the ones we saw prior when I reflected on my best learning experiences for the year. And so, you know, faced with this over and over again, both as an educator and as someone who cares about people who are working in companies, especially startups, you know, I started to think, how might we change this? How might we break this habit that every time we think that we need professional learning, it ends up looking like this instead of the kinds of social learning experiences we know work best. And so it gave me the opportunity to really consider a different modality, a different way of approaching this problem, and starting fresh without taking any of the assumptions with me that I had held for many, many, many years. So the beginning of this journey actually starts in 2009. And in the year 2009, Twitter was just coming on the scene for educators. And there were only a handful of educators on Twitter. You can see that obviously that has significantly changed. And now Twitter is something where many, many people engage. But at the time, when I was just sort of grappling with my best learning experiences versus sort of what I was experiencing in the professional space, it was a very new tool. And around that time, I had just gotten on Twitter. My classroom, we had hatched a bunch of baby chicks. And so they sent out someone from the local news crew to actually come and film sort of these baby chicks and how the whole process was unfolding in our classroom. And the thing that was most interesting was, as we were, the reason that they picked up this story was because we were tweeting about it. And they, as the news group, had just sort of picked that up on Twitter, which was a very exciting, interesting thing that had never happened before for me or anyone else in my school at the time when it happened. And so along that journey, Kevin Jarrett was one of the people who I followed on Twitter, saw everything that I was posting about my classroom and the baby chicks and my teaching colleagues. And he actually reached out to me and he said, you know, there's this unconference thing that's happening for computer coders, but let's take some educators and let's go for the day. And, you know, I have never faced a dare that I didn't love. And if someone says, let's go on a learning hunt and see what we can find, I am right there. And so he and I actually went to a bar camp in Philadelphia, and the year again was 2009. And this is what we stumbled upon. And it looked so different from all of my previous experiences. And it looked so different from classroom learning. It was truly what I call a mosh pit of ideas, where people were jockeying to get up to the board to share what they know. People were voting and deciding what was most important to them. And it was truly this democratic, organic process that I had never experienced before in a professional learning environment. And as I experienced this, and as I met other educators that day, and this is a group of people who were at the bar camp that day who are also educators, we asked ourselves a really important question. If this worked for computer coders, why couldn't this work for educators? Why don't we give it a shot? And I'll be honest, most educators are very, very organized folks. And the idea of showing up on the day of the event and figuring out what you're going to learn that day is probably something that strikes fear into the heart of many educators. I know that it made me very nervous the first time I considered it as a concept. And so this question, why not bring this model to educators, we really didn't know how this would turn out. Knowing how things have turned out now, I think it was a great question to ask. However, there were a lot of uncertainties as we were sort of preparing for this very, very first experience. And so from there, we really crafted the tenets of Edcamp, which is what we called it, because we figured it was the education version of Barcamp. And we came up with 5 tenets. We really wanted this event to be free, mostly because we had no idea what was going to happen and we didn't think anyone would pay for it. We wanted it to be open to everyone. We didn't want to just limit it to teachers. We wanted community members and parents and students and anyone who was interested in participating to be available and accessible to them. We wanted it to be a vendor-free day, so we wanted to make sure that the conversation was truly about learning and not necessarily about marketing or products or questionable research. We wanted it to be a place where anyone could present, so we wanted to make sure that every person who walked into the room wasn't just a passive participant, but instead a contributor. And we wanted to use the rule of 2 feet. So this was something that we picked up from Barcamp, which was basically this. The rule says that, if you come together on the day of the event and you put together organic learning from the wisdom of the crowd, there are going to be some things that are of incredible interest to you as a learner, and there are going to be some things that don't meet your expectations. And part of your responsibility as an empowered learner is to go where you grow and to use the rule of 2 feet, to move from space to space. And if you leave someone's session, it is not a sign of disrespect. It's actually just a sign of empowered learning, and that is perfectly okay. And that is sort of how we democratically and sort of organically ensure that the content that's happening and the interactions that people are having are worthwhile. And so we took these 5 very broad tenets and we rolled them out at the very first Edcamp Philly. So it was about May 2010 by this time. We had no budget, so we marketed by drawing on sidewalk chalk throughout the city. We tweeted, we emailed folks, and we emailed principals and asked them to email their folks. And it was a very, very shoestring budget operation. And so, we had no idea that very first day what was going to ensue or what was about to happen. The beginning of the very first day of Edcamp looked like this. It was a blank schedule board where we invited people to build the content with us. We invited people to become partners in the event and partners in the learning as they shared their expertise, and the day became less about specific noted experts, but instead about the incredible value of learning from each other as practitioners in that space. And although this was a really daunting feeling at 9 in the morning, that cold day in May when we first started, once it filled up, it was one of the most incredible feelings I had ever had, to see such a vibrant community form where perhaps there hadn't been one just that morning. And I think in this case, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And this is, these are photos from dozens of Edcamps that have happened since then. And you can kind of see both the schedule board filling up and also what the conversations actually look like. So you see very little classroom or traditional classroom settings. You see people sitting next to each other, talking to each other on their laptops. You see people exchanging ideas. You see people trying to figure things out on their devices or with each other. And this casual collaborative exchange is really what came to define the empowered educator in sort of the years to come. And so that very first year after we had the first Edcamp Philly, as sort of an afterthought that evening, we posted up on a wiki space what we had done and how we had crafted the Edcamp. And from there, what we really found was that we were so excited. There were 8 or 9 other folks across the country who had reached out to us and asked us if perhaps they too could organize Edcamp events. And we thought, wow, We had 9 Edcamp events this year. That's incredible. We'll never beat that. I remember thinking that. We'll never have more than this. This is incredible. And then the most amazing thing in the world happened, and it was partially because social media really started to take off. It was partially because educators are amazing and constantly surprise you with their generosity and their insight and their tenacity. And it was partially because there was a moment in time around 2010, 2011, when people really needed to take back control of their professional learning as educators. And I would argue that many, many professions are facing this right now as well. Things are changing so fast that we can no longer rely on, just our districts. We can no longer rely on just our universities to scale the speed of learning that's required for today's day and age. Instead, we have to rely on each other and fast-moving, nimble networks that will help us all up-level our skills in response to the new fast pace of change. And so this is what things looked like in the following year, and the following year, and the following year, and the following year, until there were too many Edcamps that I actually can no longer keep track. So Edcamps happen on Saturdays, and they happen, basically people come on their free time to experience these events, and they're happening all over the world. And every Saturday I wake up excited to see which Edcamps are happening that Saturday, because there are now so many that I actually can't keep up. And this explosion of ideas and exchange and community is something that I think speaks very deeply to our human desire to connect as learners, our human desire to experience social learning, and our human desire to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And that classroom experience doesn't necessarily build that as much as a democratic participatory idea exchange. Oh, one more. There you go. So when I really ask myself why this idea turned into a movement, I think there's a lot of different pieces at play, but I've thought about this question often, and I think the best answer that I have comes in 3 parts. The first is, I got really, really lucky. There were a lot of things in the world that aligned right at that moment to create this explosion of empowered learning. And I don't know if we could recreate that again. It was just a very fortuitous series of events that were fueled by incredibly talented educators all across the country. And the second is, I think this was a time when teachers were really dying for collaboration. And I think we still, as educators, all are dying for collaboration. I would argue that professionals in almost every field are. They are constantly looking for others who are facing the same problems that they are to get to the other side. And I think the third piece is really key. As we grew the Edcamp movement, it became a place of trust. And Edcampers really began to trust other Edcampers to give them advice and to share their expertise. And this truly became the bedrock upon which the community and the empowered learning movement grew. So if you're thinking, how do I bring empowerment? How do I bring social learning to my organization, to my profession? What are some things I might want to try? Here are just a few tips. The first is give permission. Oftentimes permission can go a million miles, and sometimes we don't even realize the walls that people have constructed around themselves or for themselves. And by simply giving permission for people to share their expertise, it can have a tremendous impact. By telling people what you have to share is incredibly valuable, and please, please share it. You will have a fundamental impact on how they view themselves and on how they view their learning. The second is focus on the environment, not the content. So often when we create learning experiences, we spend 90% of our time focusing on the content that we're about to share and 10% focusing on the environment. And what I would encourage you to do is flip that for 1 or 2 of your experiences that you have upcoming. Think about how people will interact in the space. Think about how people will feel in the space. Think about how people can participate with each other in the space, and then spend some time crafting the content that you'll share in that learning experience. And if you start with the environment first, chances are you're going to heighten the ability for people to connect socially and also heighten what they get out of that learning experience. The next thing is embrace experiments. So there were many things about Edcamp that, just to be frank, didn't work the first, the second, the third, the fourth time. And every time we have another Edcamp, we learn some things that don't work and we learn some things that do work. And so be willing to take risks and be willing to fail in the service of learning, and manage people's expectations as such as they participate in that learning experience. The next thing I would recommend is to find your tribe. So who are those people in the world that are also with you on this journey? And they may be people right within your organization, but they may not. And connect with those people, find them. There are so many ways to find other like-minded or perhaps diverse perspectives to add to your repertoire, and I would encourage you to look deeply. And then the last thing I would say is share widely. If you participate and share your work, whether that's through a blog or through groups just like the Rotary Club, you are more likely to attract people to the work that you're doing the more that they know about it. So be transparent in what's working and what's not, and you'll find that it certainly helps your efforts and it helps the growth of the environments and empowerment that you're trying to create. So those are just a few tips that you may want to consider if this type of empowered learning is something that would benefit your organization or your profession. So that was a lot of talking from me. Thank you so much. If you're interested in learning more about Edcamp, please visit our website at edcamp.org. We would love to have you as an Edcamper or part of the movement. If you want to reach out to me directly, of course, you can visit me at kristenswanson.org. Thank you so much for having me today, everyone. I hope that that was helpful to some of you and the problems that you're facing and the journeys that you are on.
Excellent stuff, Kristen. Very cool. I'm going to try to switch back to the grid view, which is got to be here. Good. And there we go. So one of the things that strikes me about kind of the whole process of taking professional development, taking learning in a different direction, is that, you know, if it's generalized enough, you know, focus on the environment, not the content, then it can apply in all sorts of situations, right? And so, you know, you made several references to other professions. I'm curious what work you might have done with people in other settings and what you might have seen that intrigued you about those changes.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We've actually seen this model really take flight, this unconference model, you know, come together on the day of the event, brainstorm the topics you want to talk about, and sort of self-select into those groups with social workers. So there's an annual conference of all social workers, and now they run it exclusively as an Edcamp. We've had a number of people in the accounting sector actually take this on as the final day of their professional accounting conference, because accounting regulations were changing so quickly that if you had to submit conference sessions months in advance, it actually would no longer be relevant. And then the third group, which is another interesting group to keep an eye on, of course, is this group around technology. So, you know, obviously the first group of bar campers were coders, and that's what inspired the first Edcamp. But we've really seen many, many different parts of the technology sector, engineers, but many, many other parts as well, really sort of embrace this model in addition.
Very cool. President-elect Stephen, would you like to toss in a comment or a question? You'll have to demute first, of course.
Yeah, that was awesome. So how long have you guys been, where did this idea come from? How did it inspire you to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that very first bar camp that we went to in 2009 was really sort of the catalyst for us to say, how could we bring an experience like this to teachers? And so the very first Edcamp was in 2010, so 7 years ago, which is hard to believe. Yeah, we've been doing this for 7 years, and we've had hundreds of events all over the world. And if you would have asked me in 2010, that, you know, how many Edcamps would there have been? I probably would have been like, I don't know, maybe there will be 10 ever in the world. So the growth was completely unexpected and really speaks to the power of the people who are involved, not any one single person who was specifically leading it. It was really a meeting of the minds.
Yeah. And you said social media was the main reason why it blew up so quickly.
You know, I think that the growth of Edcamp really coincided with the growth of educators moving to the space of Twitter.
Sure.
And it really coincided with a lot of the different social media movements that were happening. It's hard to say, would these things have happened without each other? My guess is probably not.
I see. That's awesome. So spread like wildfire. That was insane. I was looking at the stars earlier, and then went from like a few of them, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I can't even see the United States anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, you know, it's like we have like 7 coming up on Saturday, and just to think about, we had 6 here, and now we have 7 on a Saturday. It's just really a tremendously surprising and awe-inspiring type of growth. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how do you keep track of all of it now? I mean,
that's a great question. So for many, many years, this was a labor of love and a volunteer effort. But over the last year, we have received a bit of funding that allowed us to actually become a formal nonprofit. And so that formal nonprofit is called the Edcamp Foundation. And we now have an executive director and a staff member to actually help us support all of these events and support all of these educators who are engaging with Edcamp, which is very, very wonderful. And now I don't have to wake up at 3 in the morning to keep doing it. So
exactly.
So that's a good thing.
For sure.
Well,
that's awesome.
So, you know, while obviously a lot of people have been involved in making this, I think it's very cool to have highlighted Kevin Jarrett as well, who I think is an inspiration to lots and lots of educators all over the world. For those of you outside of education, he's one of those people who has put all kinds of fascinating stuff out there, challenging ideas. And, you know, you just need to have those people in your life, you know, who say, hey, why don't we go to this thing for coders, but we're educators, and right, you know, and you know, to have those kinds of people out there. Mitty has a really cool several ideas, and because he has had rather the tenuous internet connection, it's no reflection on his character, of course. I'll read it for him. But so apologies that my voice is coming from Rushton. My internet connection today is pretty wonky. My question to Kristen. Kristen, first of all, as a web designer, I have to say your slides were visually gorgeous. Thank you for providing some more inspiration on how I can make presentation slides look even better. Second, I love the work that you're doing with Edcamp. I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about how your team and Edcamp organizers communicate. I noticed you're director of running for Slack. Does your Edcamp team communicate by Slack in addition to Twitter? And if you use Slack for Edcamp, how is that working? And have you already hit the 100-person limit for nonprofits? What recommendations do you have for other nonprofits about internal communication? And in answering that, you might give a little bit of background on Slack for those who are like, what's this Slack thing?
Great questions. I'm very humbled that you liked my slides. The designers here where I work constantly tease me about them and my font choices, so I will be sure to relay your positive feedback to them tomorrow. So I think the way that we communicate, we are a very broad, disparate, highly spread team, and I would say that the #1 place where Edcampers connect is Twitter right now. And that is the #1 way that we're sharing and communicating at a high level about the work that we're doing. We do have a committee of folks who are a part of the nonprofit foundation, so that number is actually much smaller than 100. So we usually have about 1 person from every state, maybe 2 for some of our larger states that are actually in that Slack team, and that is sort of how we stayed under the 100-person limit, to your good question. And, as far as recommendations about internal communication for other nonprofits, I really think it depends on how big you are and what you need. So for those of you who are wondering what Slack is a collaboration tool that allows you to have both synchronous and asynchronous collaboration, as well as build a repository of knowledge ongoing, so that when new people are added to the system, they actually can query and sort of review things that have happened in the past. And so I think that it can be a great tool, but I certainly don't think that it's the only tool. We also rely really heavily on Google Docs and all of those tools as well to keep Edcamp up and running. And I would say that there probably would be no Edcamp if there were no Google Docs, because along the way, it's proved to be an invaluable tool. So I think it's really about who are the people in your nonprofit, what do they need to stay connected? And then once those folks are connected, how do you really get the message out to other folks who may want to join?
Very cool. Well, I see that we are actually beginning to kind of move in the we've run our time course. Mitty sends a thank you, for your answer as well. But before Kristen and I give you the last word, what I'd like to do is tell everybody who is watching this recording that we're really glad you're here. We love the opportunity to share cool ideas with people around the world. And we want to know what you think, right? So as you go a little bit farther down, there are two things we'd love for you to do. One, let us know you were here. There's an attendance survey, and you just type in your name and email, and that generates a note that you can share with your club secretary if you're making up a missed meeting. But it just helps us. It helps us to know, what folks are chiming in from different places. And then even more, a little farther down, there is the Discuss system, DISQUS. And in that system, you can see that people are leaving comments for the meeting. And so they're talking about their impressions of the content, both in this program and in other parts of the meeting. And you are welcome not simply to leave your own comment, but to reply to what others have said. We believe that kind of interaction is something special, in that it's made possible for a group of people who are literally spread around the world to be able to share ideas about things like how technology can serve the business as service, which we think is pretty cool. So as we finish this up, I'd like to pass it back to Kristen, and she will have a final word for us.
Yeah, I think my final word is never underestimate the power of empowering other people. They will continuously surprise, amaze, and inspire awe. And so every time that you question, should I trust? Should I give? Always trust, always give. You will be amazed by the results.
Good recipe for a better life. For Mitty and for Stephen and for all the members of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, Kristen, we thank you for being part of it. And everyone, we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you, Kristen.